Hi, everyone, and welcome to Senator Hickenlooper's statewide virtual town hall. Thank you all for joining us tonight to discuss the issues that you care about. And thank you to Senator Hickenlooper, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. My name is Janine Davidson, and I am the president of Metropolitan State University of Denver. That's Colorado's third largest public university. Prior to joining MSU, I spent 13 years in Washington, D.C., working on national security and defense issues as a senior Pentagon presidential appointee in the Obama administration. I'm honored to be here with you tonight as moderator for this town hall with Senator Hickenlooper. Our students are also very politically engaged, setting a record for voter turnout in the presidential election. And given that all that's going on in the country right now, I know that our faculty, our staff, and our students, as well as the rest of Colorado, are very grateful for this opportunity to hear from you, Senator. Now, we want to make sure the Senator has enough time to answer all your questions, so just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. If you haven't already submitted a question, don't worry. You can submit live questions at hickenlooper.senate.gov/live/ or in the YouTube live stream chat. Now, if we aren't able to get to your question tonight, you can always contact the senator on the office's website at hickenlooper.senate.gov. And if you'd like to be notified of future town halls and keep up with the senator's work in Washington, please subscribe to his newsletter at senatorhickenlooper.substack.com or follow him on social media. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Senator Hickenlooper for a few opening remarks. Senator?
Well, thank you, Janine, and thanks everyone for being with us tonight. I'm grateful to be here with so many fellow Coloradans, and I realize you're all as busy as I am. And I want to give a double special thanks to Dr. Janine Davidson for moderating. I mean, MSU really is a crown jewel for Colorado, and we're lucky to have her. I want to start off by saying I'm sorry that I'm not there in person tonight. The Senate's been in session since January, which means we haven't had a single week back in the state. Our office is getting thousands of calls, emails, questions. We want to make sure you hear from us, even if it's from DC. So let's get right to it. We're facing something that we've never seen before, certainly not in my lifetime. Real opponents of democracy have won elections, and they're attacking every level of our government. We've watched President Trump propose deep cuts to Medicaid to fund tax breaks for the ultra wealthy. And I'm supportive of the half of the tax breaks that go to working people, but over half of it goes to people who in many cases are so wealthy they don't even need it. President Trump is firing workers across government with no plan, leaving our national parks, our veterans, even our weather services in the lurch. He's attacked our allies while cozying up to one of the greatest adversaries in the world, Vladimir Putin. If any Republican dares to stand up to any of this, one of the wealthiest people in the world on earth threatens to fund a primary opponent for that Republican to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. I share the anger, the frustration many of you are feeling. We've received over 1,000 questions for this town hall. I mean, people are hurting. The administration is betting that this assault, this flooding the zone, is going to divide us. But that's exactly why we need to stand together. I also want to reflect on what we've built over these past 4 years. Colorado roads, bridges, airports modernized through the bipartisan infrastructure law. The PACT Act expanded health care for our veterans to a larger extent than ever before in history. The Inflation Reduction Act is cutting energy costs, creating jobs, and driving the clean energy transition. Progress and jobs that we can't afford to lose. Meanwhile, Trump, it's chaos. He thrives on chaos. The media eats it up, and real issues get buried and ignored. We've got to cut through the noise, and that means public pressure that can force Republicans, especially in the House that's so contentious and so close, but that forces Republicans to face up to the pain that they're creating. We're going to fight back. We're slowing votes down on the Senate floor, challenging illegal actions in the White House or any of the agencies, wherever we see those actions. Whistleblowers are stepping up. We're trying to follow up and make sure they have what they need to go public. But we need you too. We need your calls and emails. Keep them coming. Keep showing up. We will amplify your voice every step of the way in every way that we can. Now, right now, we're on the brink of a government shutdown. The House Republicans passed a so-called continuing resolution to fund the government through September. They put together this bill without any Democratic negotiation, no Democratic input whatsoever. And then while they were doing this, they knew that they don't have the votes to pass it. I mean, that's just irresponsible. And it led us to the brink of this shutdown. Buried in their proposal is, well, it's a power grab, a dangerous power grab. They want to give Trump unchecked control over our nation's spending. I mean, our Constitution is clear. Congress holds the power of the purse. This bill would wipe out congressional oversight, letting Trump cut and redirect funding however he wants. That includes funding for Colorado, science, housing, veterans programs, gone at his whim. Now, I'm not going to give President Trump more authority to undermine powers that rightly belong to Congress and to the people of Colorado. The longer I look at it, this is a fundamental test of our democracy. So when this bill reaches the Senate floor, I will vote no. We need a funding bill that preserves Congress's authority and, by extension, your voice. And I know we can do this. We have bipartisan appropriation bills that have been negotiated, came out of their committees with bipartisan majorities. But we're going to need Republicans to join us. And what I'm asking for is simple. I hope that we can convince the Senate to support a 30-day funding bill and then work together in that 30-day period to solve what's remaining of these budget issues and get to solving the problems facing our country. I'm ready and willing, and I hope there'll be some Republicans willing to do that as well. I want to close and get to the questions by saying that this conversation didn't start and it won't end tonight. We've done at least 4 town halls a year since I've come to the Senate. That's not changing. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter X at Senator Hick, or sign up for our email newsletter, the Giddy Update. Get it? The Giddy Update at Senator Hickenlooper.substack.com. Stay engaged. Stay loud. We're all in this together. And with that, let's get some questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. You talked a lot about checks and balances, basically. And our first question is from Megan from Denver. She says, can you tell us about your strategy to limit President Trump and Elon Musk's executive overreach?
Yeah. Our strategy to fight back against the Trump administration's effort to, well, they're trying to dismantle the federal government. I think it can be broken down into 2 buckets. In one sense, we are slowing down everything on the Senate floor and fighting their actions both in the Senate and in the courts. The second thing is we're building a public campaign against them with the help of whistleblowers, social media. We're trying to make sure that we can shine a bright light on these, in so many cases, illegal acts, the irrational firing of people that are doing a great job, trying to defund whole programs. Most Americans are going to fight this. Now, Democrats are in the minority in both houses, but we've learned from Mitch McConnell that we still have some power in the minority. So we're going to use every power tool at our disposal to disrupt this sense of business as usual on the Senate floor. Dems held the floor all night to protest the Republicans' budget proposal, which would cut critical services that Coloradans rely on, again, just for tax cuts to super wealthy people. we introduced 20 plus amendments to the budget resolution to remove provisions that would harm Coloradans. We voted no after the R's. No, no, no. I mean, the R's voted no after our amendments. Congress is granted the power of the purse in the Constitution. Many of Trump's cuts to funding passed by Congress are, by any measure, unconstitutional. It's the judicial branch's job to hold the Trump administration accountable when they violate the Constitution, and we're going to stay after that. That's why we're taking the fight to the courts. There are a couple thousand lawyers working to find and litigate every instance where the administration has broken the law. And there are currently something like 100 ongoing legal challenges to the Trump administration policies. And about 41 of those rulings have already paused or restrained some of the president's initiatives. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled against President Trump's request to freeze nearly $2 billion in foreign aid. The Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to comply with the lower court order to unfreeze the federal funds. Now, this is by any measure good news. It suggests that courts are going to push back against President Trump's overreach. We're also working to support whistleblowers at federal agencies in any way that we can, make sure they can maintain the anonymity, that they can feel safe. The second part of our strategy involves all of you. We're working to build a massive public campaign to make sure everyone back home understands what is going on, what the Republicans are doing, and how it's hurting working Americans. Republicans may have a majority in both houses of Congress, but it is slim. And we need to build the pressure on the most vulnerable Republicans. There are something like 50 districts where Republicans are vulnerable. So to do this, to put the pressure on them, try to hold them accountable, we're going to be holding town halls and uplifting and posting and retweeting local stories about how the administration's cuts and mass firings are hurting Coloradans. We need to get so loud that they can't drown us out in the next news cycle. We're also exploring new media landscapes to make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can. Again, we're working with influencers. Some of these young kids, 24, 26 years old, they've got several million followers, but they're progressive. And they will amplify the work we're doing, and we can help amplify them as well. I don't think we can rely on network television anymore and traditional social media to get the job done. If that's the only way we're going to get our message out. We can't let them paralyze us. We can't let them divide us. Right? They're going to try and get us into that circular firing squad and shooting at each other. Our job is to work with all of you and make sure that we fight back together. We fight back united.
As some of those efforts manage to slow or reverse the administration's efforts with the federal government, are you worried that some of the damage will already be done with respect to how the government operates?
I mean, you're exactly right. And there are places where damage is already occurring. I mean, I've talked to people that have been laid off. They've had careers. They were 4 years or 3 years away from retirement. And they were in a position where they were vulnerable. And you can't repair that damage to someone's life. But there's no indication that anybody at DOJ really is thinking in those terms. They're not going in there and trying to find where are the best places to make these cuts. They're just using a pickaxe and a hammer.
Yeah. Our next question is from Robin from Gibson. What are you doing to protect our national parks and public lands that are under attack?
Well, that's the perfect Colorado question. So thank you for that.
Yes, it is.
I mean, obviously, we cherish our national parks and our public lands probably more than any other state in the country. They're part of what make us so special. They also are a huge part of our economy. In 2023, outdoor recreation economy generated, I think it's almost, maybe it's more than $17 billion for Colorado's economy, and employed, I think it's 130,000 Coloradans. I mean, That's no joke. Those are big numbers for any state. Coloradans overwhelmingly support protecting our public lands. You look at any poll, there's 75, 80, sometimes 85% of voters who support the protections for our public lands. That doesn't seem to stop or slow down the Trump administration. They're threatening all of that. They've fired over 3,400 U.S. Forest Service employees. 3,400. They fired another 2,300 workers from the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Indian Affairs. There might be even another one. I mean, these are cuts that we're going to feel. And these are the folks who are being fired who are responsible for wildfire mitigation, for timber management, for all kinds of things. They're the people that remove hazardous fuels on federal lands or clean the campsites, maintain our trails. This doesn't all happen by itself. These cuts are going to put Colorado at a higher risk for wildfires. These cuts are going to hurt our economy. They're going to limit our access to our own public lands. And let me say, it couldn't come at a worse time. Coloradans are, lacing up their boots with the warmer weather coming, as the risk of wildfires is really beginning to increase as we get closer to the summer. I mean, this is the worst time to be laying off all these people. And that's why we're pushing back. We're supporting the lawsuits against these illegal layoffs, and many of them have been illegal. We're also building a public pressure campaign, like I mentioned, to show how dangerous these cuts really are and the damage they've done. We've sent letters to the federal agencies demanding answers. We're sharing stories of real people and real harm caused by these actions and trying to make sure that the media will cover it. Before President Trump's joint address last week, we highlighted the story of a young woman named Amelia. She's a Navy veteran. She lives up in Fort Collins. After she left the military, she got her dream job with the U.S. Forest Service. And Amelia was fired from her job with the U.S. Forest Service last month after she'd been honorably discharged from the Navy and had been judged to have 100% disabilities. So this was her dream job. She'd sacrificed so much already, and they just laid her off like it was of no importance. I mean, Trump has already fired 6,000 veterans who are dedicated public servants, just like Amelia. We need to be united in our fight and draw more and more press coverage, get more and more social media to make these stories become current so everyone hears about them. I mean, that's what we can all do together.
Our next question is from Kelly Jo in Colorado Springs, and she's concerned about Medicaid and wants to know what you are doing to save Medicaid.
Well, thank you, Kelly Jo. I mean, let me first say, and I wrote this in a letter to the editor of the Middletown Press way back in 1978. I always give Bernie Sanders a hard time because I wrote it 10 years before he does. Healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And let's recognize the Republicans' budget for what it is. It's a blatant attempt to strip critical services like Medicaid from Americans who need the help, who need that help the most. And they're stripping these critical services to fund these tax breaks for ultra wealthy. Bottom line, millions are going to lose their health care coverage, and the ultra wealthy get tax cuts that in many cases they don't need, in all cases they don't need, in many cases they don't even want. The House budget resolution calls on the committee that oversees Medicaid to cut, and think about this, they cut $880 billion from their budget, $880 billion. Now, there's not enough funding under the Energy and Commerce Committee's jurisdiction, everything we do, to come close to achieving that $880 billion in deficit without cutting Medicaid. So when they say, oh, we're going to have this budget and we won't cut Medicaid, that's a mathematical impossibility. We've got a million Coloradans that are enrolled in either Medicaid or CHIP. That's almost 1 in 6 Coloradans. 60% of the seniors in nursing homes are able to be there because they're covered by Medicaid. You cut Medicaid at that level, and you're going to have a lot of grandmothers and grandfathers out on their ear or bankrupt. President Trump says he wants to rid the government of fraud and abuse. This budget not only does a poor job of that, but it would balloon our national debt by over $4 trillion. That's a trillion with a T. His administration's plan is to help, again, the wealthiest Americans. It's to run up the debt and to let everybody else pay. But I think we're fighting back. I know we're fighting back. We're going to push back against this budget proposal. We're going to make sure that this resolution fails because, well, the devastation would be amazing. And I think these are the things that we've got to really, really fight for. When we stayed up all night a month ago fighting a bunch of the amendments were going to protect access to, we were introducing amendments that were going to protect Medicaid and investments in renewable energy, veterans benefits. The Republicans blocked every single one. I think we can use those votes to let the public know what the Republicans have been doing. In other words, they are on the record by those votes. We made them vote on those amendments and bills so that they are on the record, and when the time comes, we'll be able to make sure that they can be held accountable. When they go back to their states or to Colorado, when they hold town halls, they're going to have to answer for those votes.
Good. Our next question is from Terry in Lakewood. She says, according to Republicans, what is supposed to benefit giving huge tax cuts to the richest Americans?
I can already feel I'm getting hoarse talking about it.
I know.
I mean,
it's allergy season.
I don't understand. There's this primitive theory that the tax cuts to the truly wealthy will put more, they'll invest it in large corporations and companies, and there'll be more capital, and that'll help the economy to grow. I haven't seen anybody who's been able to demonstrate that to me, that works.
The trickle down?
Yeah, the trickle down. Trump says Congress should pass tax cuts for everyone and pretends he's not doing it to help the rich. But when you look at it, the average tax benefit that people who make less than $400,000 a year, their average benefit is about $400, and it's tens of thousands. I don't know what it is for the people that are, the top 1% get huge amounts. To fund these tax breaks, that's why they're doing all these cuts, right? And again, I'm in favor of maintaining the tax cuts that we have in place for working people making less than $400,000. But there's no reason to put out such enormous tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. And he's going to have to cut $880 billion from the budget. That means coming after Medicaid. He's going to balloon our deficit to $4 trillion. That doesn't sound like it's efficiency to me, but it doesn't seem to bother anyone over there. I mean, again and again, I can say this. They're cutting critical services for Colorado to make sure they get these tax cuts for super wealthy. Democrats definitely need to protect tax breaks for the working people. I just want to make that perfectly clear. And the Trump administration's cuts are skewed so heavily towards the ultra wealthy that if you restrain the cuts just for the working people, you probably could even make them a little larger and still not have to make the brutal cuts that they've been talking about.
Our next question is from Joanne Bader in Denver. What can you do to protect Social Security?
Well, let's start and just be very clear. I don't support any cuts of any kind to our central social safety net programs, especially Social Security. Social Security has unbelievably broad bipartisan popularity. Every one of you watching tonight you paid into it your entire working life. You deserve this benefit. You deserve to retire with dignity. This January AP NORC, I think that's how you say it, but the AP poll found that 2/3 of Americans say the government is spending too little on Social Security. 87, I think that's right, 87% of Americans agree that Social Security should be a priority for the nation. 87%. And that's exactly the reason the Trump administration continues to allege that they're not going to make any cuts to Social Security, to Medicaid, to Medicare. But I think we know the truth. We're going to use every tool at our disposal to push back against any of these attempts to gut Social Security. Any bill that needs 60 votes is going to need Democrats, and I don't know a single Democrat that would in any way support that kind of bill. In the meantime, we can keep fighting back by turning up the pressure on Republicans. Again, as I've said before, their majorities in the House and Senate are pretty slim. You only have to pick off a few Republicans in the House to tank their legislation. And we need to call them out for trying to take away people's retirement, especially in social media where it can get retweeted and put out where more people will see it.
Our next question is from Joan in Highlands Ranch. Why are you opposed to making government smaller?
Joan, I love that question. I was a geologist when I first came out to Colorado, and then I got laid off. I was out of work a couple of years, opened a restaurant, the Wine Coop. Some of you have been there. And like everybody in a small business, worked my fingers to the bone. We worked really hard, and finally it really took off. And I got frustrated because I thought the Denver City Council and the Denver mayor were making decisions just to get reelected. So I ran, the first time I got into politics in 2003, I ran on the premise that I was going to come in as mayor and make the city government smaller and yet do more. But I didn't come in and say I was going to use an axe to make cuts. I mean, we did make city government smaller. But in doing that, I spent 8 or 10 hours every week, maybe more, down in the agencies, talking to the workforce, telling them why what they're doing is so important, that public service is an honor and a privilege, and that we're going to go through a hard time. We had a serious budget deficit at that point. The dot-com bubble had burst, and we didn't have a choice. We went down to the different agencies, and for 6 months, every Friday afternoon, people would have to take unpaid leave. Again, we didn't do layoffs because that makes it impossible. But we worked with people as best we could. I think it was within 4 months or 6 months, we went to every other week Friday, and we worked our way out of that. People retired. We had a hiring freeze for a couple of years. I mean, we balanced the budget, and we were able to control the growth. It was smaller. So I believe that that everything needs to be pruned, right? And when I became governor, we went on to governor of Colorado. We went over all 24,500 rules and regulations, and we either eliminated 11,000 of them or dramatically simplified them, just because it was too much red tape, too much bureaucracy. That's what you have when you have too much government. I think most Americans think government probably should be a little smaller. The person who did the last couple of years of that pruning in the state was Joe Neguse, who worked for us in the cabinet and did a great job of finishing that job. I look at each of those things, the hiring freeze when I was in the mayor's office, to make sure that we went into each agency and made sure we knew what everyone was doing, so that we knew how we were spending the money and what we were getting for it, so that we could really look for actual fraud, waste, and abuse. I mean, if that's what we're about, I'm game. But that's not what the Trump administration is doing. They're taking an axe and a sledgehammer to our federal government without any concern about the impact it's going to have on Coloradans or Americans. You just can't throw our veterans, working families, or the services we all depend on. You just can't throw them under the bus to say that you're looking for fraud and abuse. In a truly chaotic late night 2-page memo at the end of January, and this is just one example, the Trump administration halted all federal grants and loans. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in federal spending for a staggering number of programs with no planning, no process how we're going to work through this. In true Trump fashion, the rollout was chaotic. It seemed reckless. Our offices and staff were flooded with thousands of calls and emails, people coming in to visit. We heard from folks in literally every corner of Colorado, the big cities, but the small towns as well, asking, what does this mean? What does it mean for them, for their families, for their neighbors? All of this, if it was implemented as requested, would have had a devastating impact on Colorado. I mean, Head Start, truly vital service for over 9,000 low-income kids in Colorado, they probably have to shutter their operations. I used to do volunteering when I was at Wide Cube. Volunteering for Meals on Wheels serves 25,000 seniors, and they would have been unlikely, certainly they were unsure whether they would be able to continue serving these meals, these hot meals. Many cases, when Meals on Wheels would come to a senior's home, that was the first time or the only time that week where that senior would get to see other adults, non-medical personnel, non-nurses. Colorado rural hospitals and clinics that serve and employ our rural neighbors would have been left out in the cold. Funding for our resources for our veterans, as I've said before, their medical attention, their mobility. It's hard to watch cruelty given to those who have given so much to this country. We would have lost medical research that's helping us find cures, cancer, to try and mitigate some of the infectious diseases like bird flu. I can go down this list. The funding was already appropriated by Congress on a bipartisan basis, too. In every case, this was bipartisan. This is not an opinion. It's in the Constitution that right belongs to Congress. What they're trying to do is, by any measure, illegal. It's blatantly illegal. We held the Senate floor with fellow senators to speak about the dangers of Trump's nominee to lead the Office of Management and Budget. He was the architect of this whole Project 2025 nonsense. We also highlighted the stories of organizations and people impacted to drive home that these cuts have real impact. And we pushed the administration to restore funding. Now, luckily, the courts agree with us in this case, and in multiple cases, they've issued restraining orders and temporary holds. The Supreme Court ruled against the administration on freezing foreign aid. But make no mistake, this is what they've tried to do from day one, and they're going to keep poking and prodding the Constitution until they can get what they want. And in most cases, it's power, it's naked power. I think it's time to fight back. I think Colorado.org has been locked out of their funds, unable to provide service. While we're working through it in the courts, we're committed to fighting both. And everywhere we look, we're going to fight to make sure that we can preserve this funding for Colorado and Colorado organizations.
Great. The next question is a live question from Barbara Klein on YouTube. She says, I'm concerned about our country. Trump is siding with Putin and not our allies. What are Democrats doing to maintain our friends?
This is one of the things that a lot of people don't care about as much. And yet, I've been around long enough. I'm looking at my father and mother in heaven, and they would be so disappointed in our country. The simple truth here is what's important. Russia invaded Ukraine. Putin is a dictator, not President Zelensky. The Trump administration wants to convince the American people that Ukraine is the aggressor, while it's Russia that so badly wants peace. In Trump's mind, peace equals a permanent victory for Putin and Russia. And I think that's partly he just wants to get a deal done. He's like a lot of these real estate guys, he's really just about the next deal. This isn't that kind of a deal. I mean, Ukraine has been fighting for their existence. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed or wounded. They're fighting for freedom, and the freedom they're fighting for is part of our freedom. That's just the way I feel. I think President Trump has weakened U.S. leadership in NATO. I think he wants to allow Russia to continue this brutal invasion. Who knows how long it would take Russia to decide they want to invade other Eastern European countries. In top of all that, just some of the basic functions of the presidency. I've never seen a president dress down an ally, the leader of one of our allies that were trying to help defend their country, like we saw in the Oval Office a couple weeks ago. It's disgraceful. We need to hold the president and our Republican colleagues accountable. There is still tremendous bipartisan support for Ukraine, for those incredibly brave men and women that are doing everything they can to fight for their freedom. If you go back in history and look at the other times when Ukraine's given up to Russia, the Russians have come in and brutalized them and taken their grain. There have been famines. Millions have died. I mean, this is not new territory for Ukrainians. So it's a big opportunity for us to ramp up the pressure and make sure we set the record straight. That some things aren't for simple negotiation. I realize there's got to be a give and take. We do need to get peace. War is debilitating for everybody, but we need to set the record straight.
Our next question is from Victoria in Denver. She says, which Republican senators seem like they might be willing to stand up to Trump, and how can the public help sway them to do so?
Great question. Let me think just, I mean, I'm not sure I want to name any of the Republicans because I'd get them in trouble.
Fair.
It's just, these are difficult times, and I wouldn't want to put them in that position. But I will tell you, there are 12 or 14, maybe 15 or 20 Republican senators that know this is wrong. Especially Ukraine is a classic example. There are at least 20 Republicans that previously were outspoken in their belief that we should be supporting Ukraine. Probably 30, at least. What is most troubling to me, I've again never seen anything in my lifetime, never heard of it happening anywhere else. But many of these Republican senators, and certainly in the House as well, they're terrified of bucking anything in Trump's agenda or speaking out. Elon Musk has threatened to fund primary opponents for any Republican who doesn't fall in line, and $50 million to him in a primary is chump change, right? It means nothing to him. And as we all know, in a primary, that's a huge number. Senate Democrats are using every tool at our disposal to push back against the administration, but we are in the minority, and we have to push back against the Republicans that they need to stand up to. And I think that notion, this is again where you all come in, as I've said before, you need to keep that drumbeat up on social media. You have to keep organizing in your communities. I have my prop here. This is a great book. And Janine has the same book before we went on the air. But this is a book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder. It's a little teeny book, 20 lessons. But it talks about how our networks and our people, and continuing to create new relationships and smile at strangers, but those social networks are what push back when people are trying to make power grabs and take away people's rights. And I think we've already seen Republicans get major pushback from constituents in town halls and meetings in conservative districts in Georgia, Tennessee, Kansas. We got to keep that up. They are vulnerable. And if people come to enough town halls and hold town halls without them, cut out their picture and put it on cardboard, and Cory Gardner, when I ran against him in 2020, they had a little life-size picture of Cory that they called Cardboard Cory. They took that to town hall meetings. They took that everywhere. And that was because he voted and was against the Affordable Care Act, and people in Colorado knew they'd lose their health care. That's the kind of thing we've got to do in town halls all around the state. And I think then they become more afraid of you, of us, than of Trump.
All right. Next question is from Richard from Alamosa. Rural veterans are still underserved, and now the VA is eliminating necessary jobs. What are you doing to ensure rural veterans get their benefits and services?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it's what's happening is a travesty of history, and Republicans and Democrats alike, a broad bipartisan Senate majority supported the PACT Act, which allowed veterans who'd been around these toxic burn pits throughout the Middle East and even in parts of Europe, and they had a number of predictable diseases, and yet they were having to prove through medical research and courts of law that their cancer or their disease, which clearly was, and statistics showed it was a result of these burn pits, it would have been. Anyway, this is the first time we interrupted that and allowed them to get their benefits directly. And this is important in Colorado because we're the proud home of over 400,000 veterans. We're on a per capita basis, I think we are the highest density of veterans in the country. These are men and women who put their lives on the line to protect our country, and we made them a promise. Our country made them a promise, and it's our job to ensure that they get the care and the services that they were promised. Whenever I was governor, I would go and try to see veterans anytime I could. Ever since I got to the Senate, I've made supporting veterans and enhancing VA care a priority. The PACT Act, like I said, it's advanced care to over 1 million veterans. The news that the Trump administration is planning to fire 80,000 staff from the Veterans Administration is beyond words. It's insulting to our nation's heroes, and insulting is not a strong enough word. This is a family show, so I won't go and go crazy, but it's outrageous. They're out here openly stating that they want to make it harder for our veterans to receive the care and services that they've earned. The impacts of these cuts would hit everyone. It would certainly hit rural vets even harder, meaning longer wait times to get the care they need, longer travel to get to that care. It's unconscionable. The Trump administration is also firing thousands of veterans who work in other agencies. Veterans have always had preferential hiring in the federal government. Roughly 30% of the federal workers are veterans. Already over 6,000 veterans have been let go. How could we be doing this? We've been hearing from Colorado veterans across the state who've lost their jobs just like I was telling you about Amelia. I think we've pushed back, and I will continue to push back again and again to make sure that we interrupt this reckless. These are not thought through. There's no plan. It's just cut, cut, cut. We introduced an amendment during the reconciliation process, which of course they ignored, but this was an amendment seeking to reverse workforce cuts and fill frontline vacancies like at the Veteran Health Administration, particularly personnel who provide access to health care for rural veterans. We joined many of our colleagues in sending a very direct letter to President Trump demanding the fired veterans be reinstated across the federal government. We also supported a resolution condemning mass termination of VA employees. I just can't imagine what these people are thinking, how they think this is a good idea, how they think it's going to be a good idea politically that people won't show up and protest in huge numbers and won't vote in 2 years. Firing veterans serving our communities is not a way to find fraud, waste, and abuse. It's not waste. It's not fraud. It's not abuse.
Our next question doesn't say who it's from. How are you preventing further cuts to government science facilities in Colorado, especially NOAA, NCAR, and the DOE labs?
Another good question. And again, this is one of those things it's an affront. That's the wrong word. It's an embarrassment. Colorado is one of the leading science states in the country. It's a big reason why we have so many tech companies starting up here and moving here. We actually took to the Senate floor last week to talk about this. I know, I graduated in 1979 with a master's in earth sciences. There are not too many scientists currently serving in the Senate, to say the least. I know something about this. I know how important it is. I know that science isn't perfect, but science is essential to help us look to the future or look to the past, understand what's happening in the present, and then make a better future. American people look to us. They look to science for trust and for accurate, factual information, so they can have the freedom to raise their families without fear. Now, that trust is broken. Again, I'm not saying all science is perfect. I'm not saying that, that one agency or another hasn't made mistakes. But when trust is broken, things fall apart. And that trust is broken when partisan officials use their platforms to spread disinformation, reckless disinformation that is clearly going to be harmful. And it can overwhelm Americans with views that already, if Americans already have an inclination towards anti-science narratives, this can overwhelm them. Unfortunately, the new administration has elevated people into cabinet positions who peddle some of this anti-science claims and mistruths, misinformation. And this threatens not just Coloradans, but our country. It puts us at risk. That's why funding for things like medical research through the NIH or climate research at NOAA, why it's so important. Again, we have these amazing places like NOAA and NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. We have medical research going on in this state that's going to help us get vaccines that will prepare us for potentially future pandemics or get us closer to a cure for cancer. Some of the research at NOAA is, on the cutting edge of helping us understand wildfires and how they spread and how to best contain them. NOAA's a huge part of being able to track this worsening drought we've been dealing with for the last 20 years. The question we ask day in and day out, why these cuts? At the CDC in Fort Collins, they're doing research there in terms of vector diseases like Lyme disease. Why the cuts at labs like NREL, where they're really on the edge of some major breakthroughs in how do we get to a clean energy future? Or NIST, which is going to play such a big role in setting the standards for AI if we give them the resources. I mean, I can't agree with you more that your question that science and scientists doing this work is vital. It absolutely is. And we've seen that the Trump administration already flip on this a few weeks ago. They fired 300 people doing nuclear security and then realized their mistake and had to bring them back. This is something that should be bipartisan. There are research labs, federal research labs in literally every state. So Republican senators have national labs in their districts. I think we all have to step up and say, wait a second, we cannot let this fear-mongering and this anti-science rhetoric take over the dialogue. And I know this is something, all these things we've talked on tonight, they're all crucially important. But this one's a big one. We've already demanded an investigation for those fired from NOAA. Senator Bennett and Representative Neguse are joining us in that. And we're working to make sure we understand who at NOAA is being fired and why. I mean, so often they give one reason, and it turns out that reason has nothing to do with reality. We need to know who and why.
Tim from Centennial is asking, what can Congress do, please, to protect energy tax credits in the IRA?
And again, as I've said all the way along, we're the minority, and so our tools are limited. This is one place, and I worked real hard on the IRA. You know, I bugged poor Joe Manchin until he couldn't see straight. But we got that passed, probably the greatest investment in addressing climate change, certainly in the history of this country, probably in the history of the world. I don't think it matters who's in charge of Washington. I think climate is a threat to our future, to our children's future, our grandchildren's future. And there's not a lot of question about this anymore. When we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the historic Inflation Reduction Act, I'll call it, it was to help us unlock our clean energy future. And we've invested millions in Colorado, created over 400,000 jobs across the country. Here's the fact that this is, to answer your question, roughly 70% of all the benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act go to red states. And I think when these guys dig through all the muck that they're throwing around, and they recognize that these are red states, in many cases these investments are in rural parts of the state, I think we should be able to get back to a bipartisan push on this. But again, a lot of what's going on doesn't make logical sense. So just when you think, oh, well, this 70% is going to red states, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, it's crazy. They say there's waste. Tell that to California, where they just lost over $250 billion from the recent wildfires alone. We need to recognize that reducing the severity of climate disasters is the best way we're ever going to achieve government efficiency. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act lowered energy costs, increases reliability, it creates jobs, but at the same time, it's addressing climate change. So there are many benefits, and relatively speaking, the cost is, I would say it's a bargain. And I think we're going to fight any effort that comes to the Senate to roll back any part of the Inflation Reduction Act. We're talking to a bunch of the Republicans who understand the impact of IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, in their states, and want to preserve it. So I think we should be able to cobble this together and make sure that, you know, the Republicans publicly supporting the energy tax credits, which you see a bunch of them in the House, they're going to fight to preserve them as well. We just have to keep the pressure up on the vulnerable House Republicans. And again, so many of them are from rural areas.
70%, you said.
70% of the benefits from the Inflation Reduction Act these investments are going into red states, not blue states.
All right. Live question next from Carol on YouTube. Please comment on the disastrous funding cuts to the NIH.
You know, this is the toughest town hall I've ever done, just because every question makes my stomach churn. And these are cuts that they're not just foolish and irresponsible. They're really painful to think about what's going on. I mean, the National Institute of Health, the NIH, I mean, their work, their medical research, I mean, that's how we cured polio. When we separated DNA from RNA and used that breakthrough, and that happened, Tom Cech was part of that up at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and helped create mRNA technology that produced the COVID vaccines, right? Can you imagine, go back to, imagine if we hadn't done that work and didn't have those vaccines. We got them in 300 days. We should be able to get them in 100 days, but not if we attack science. I think that you look at all the science that happens right here in Colorado, pioneering treatments for children diagnosed with AIDS, and there's a new shingles vaccine, which I've got. I didn't get the new one, unfortunately. I got the old one too late. That's a longer story. I'll spare you all that. Science is at the center of I could go down a list of 50 breakthroughs. And our federal government is the engine, the source of so much of that scientific research. Our government helps fund biomedical research for literally every health issue you could imagine that affects the American people. And we find these cures, and then we share the cures with the world. And again, it's a business. I'm not arguing that sometimes some of the pharmaceutical companies make too much profit. They charge huge amounts to the government, to Medicare, when they've got something that's really needed. But more often than not, these miracle cures are being shared with the world, and they can afford them. I think we had a couple of the big pharma companies that, I'm trying to think which one it was, came to the Senate floor a couple of weeks ago. I can't think of which one it was, but they were talking about the rise of anti-science claims and vaccine skepticism and how dangerous that is. Anyway, I think they're going to try and slash, the administration is going to try and slash $4 billion in federal funding for critical research. And this doesn't just cut, and you can't just start it up again. When you cut serious research, that lab, which costs somebody usually a couple years to put together and usually millions of dollars, it gets broken up in pieces, and different parts go and get reused somewhere else. Some other new laboratory has to be set up from scratch. In 2023, Colorado researchers received almost $600 million from the NIH. Bladder cancer and brain injuries, repairing brain injuries, which is of special significance to our soldiers or our wounded warriors. I go down the long list. We have researchers from Northeast Colorado down to, Southwest, Fort Lewis College in Southwest Colorado. All this research is, moving our country forward. National Jewish out on East Colfax is one of the leading research organizations around asthma treatment and pulmonary function in the world. Again, University of Colorado, Anschutz, CSU up in Fort Collins. You go down the list, these are big-time research engines. And attempts to stop research against the avian flu or a future pandemic, a cure for cancer, or PTSD, any of these things is going to impact our most vulnerable communities. So we have to hold the line, push back, make sure that we let people recognize and hear about all the benefits that they get without even knowing about it from the research that goes on in Colorado.
So listen, we only have time for one more question. So here's the last question from Jennifer, Copper Mountain. Dear Senator, what should I be doing in these dark times to express my thoughts and feelings? Do I write letters? To whom? What can I do? I feel I can combat my anger at the Trump administration by doing something. Help, she says.
A great question. Let me say it from personal experience that sometimes combating what they're doing doesn't take away the anger. But generally, anger doesn't do you what you need to get done. And I think what we are talking about tonight and what we're, I think, all working toward is a strategy and a program that if we can successfully implement it, we will stop this horror that we've been going through. I mean, my advice is that we have to, as much as possible, disrupt business as usual. We need to show up at town halls, make voices heard. And it is true, I'm just kind of kidding at the beginning, that getting involved does make you feel better. It also connects you to other people. And in many cases, that shared purpose is just what the Trump administration doesn't want us to have. You know how they always are attacking everyone and that's a lie and that's a lie. Everything's designed to make us in a mood where we won't talk to strangers. We don't want to get to know our neighbor. That's the opposite of what working and protesting and showing up at town hall does. Excuse me, now I've got the hiccups. I got myself overexcited. I think those efforts to show up and really put pressure on Republicans, especially in the House, that's got real potential. Our office gets thousands of calls, emails. I mean, constituents in person walking in. We hear you. And not only is it getting our attention, it's getting Republicans' attention too. And we know they're feeling the pressure, that it's impacting them. We're seeing intense backlash from voters at Republican town halls, not just in purple states, but we're seeing the backlash in red states as well, which means we're breaking through the noise that Trump's trying to create. This flood the zone, crazy news cycles. If we keep at it, we can break through. I guess I'd also encourage you to volunteer in other ways within your community. Get involved in advocacy organizations. Again, the Trump administrations are trying to hurt the most vulnerable in our communities. They want to disrupt and discredit civil society, the nonprofits trying to help their neighbors. We need to push back against that and make sure we do help people who've lost some of their federal support. We help them where we can. We need to volunteer at homeless shelters and food pantries. Go to local schools and make sure our third graders know how to read. Help our community members navigate these the next 4 years. I guess I'd say it, let's show our strength all the way up and down the ballot in 2 years. And this is not just voting for president in 4 years. There are school board elections between now and then, city council elections. I mean, this is a democracy. Our democracy is legitimately being phrased, or threatened, phrased. I'm a little tired. It's been long days and long nights here. But it is being threatened. And we can't do this without you. You are the bread and butter and the opportunity for us to really push back and win.
And listen, unfortunately we're out of time this evening. I want to say thanks to everybody who tuned in and participated tonight. I want to say thank you also to the senator and to your staff for taking the time for this conversation. I know that my community here at MSU Denver is really, really grateful. They have lots and lots of questions and lots of anxieties, and I know lots of them tuned in today or tonight. Actually, no, it's late there. Prior to tonight, I know that Senator Hickenlooper had over 2,600 questions pre-submitted and even more coming in live that we took some of those. You can always submit more questions or comments to the senator's office by phone or email. Go to hickenlooper.senate.gov. So with that, Senator, any closing remarks or thoughts?
Well, thank you, Janine, and thank everybody for being on this call. I do feel empowered that so many people had questions, so many people showed up. That's it. There is no other way we're going to win. I know how busy you are. I appreciate your time. I mean, we're in this fight together, and I've said before, all the calls we're getting, especially from Republicans, these are going to push back against the Trump administration. So please show up at the town halls, make your voice heard, get involved in social media. We'll try and retweet where we can or repost. We're already seeing that public pressure is working. As I've said, there's already the beginning of a serious backlash from voters at the town hall. So more of that backlash, more of that work, it means we're breaking through. So thank you, volunteer, advocacy, all the stuff we've been talking about for the last hour. I will do everything I can to support you, retweet, show up where I can. I'm going to try and get around the state here, as much as I can, because this is really a time where we need to be with each other and work together. So let me just say don't forget to vote. Many local elections before 2028 and 2026. So if you didn't get a chance to speak, you can always submit that question, as Janine said, to hickenlooper.senate.gov. Let our office provide support if you're having trouble with a federal agency like the IRS or the Veterans Administration, or citizenship or immigration. Again, the best way is to go to our website, hickenlooper.senate.gov, and click the big Get Help button. Finally, we are going to continue planning virtual and in-person town halls. So follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter to get those details. Thank you again, Janine, for doing such a great job. Thank you to MSU for having the wisdom to hire you. And thanks to everybody. I'm looking forward to chatting again soon. And we're in this fight for keeps. We will not quit.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.